Hello everyone. So this week we're talking about Parashat Lech Lecha. Parashat Lech Lecha starts with God telling Avraham to go to Israel, right? Lech Lecha me'aretzecha u'mimoletecha u'mibeit avicha el ha'aretz asher arecha. So God tells him, go from the lands of your fathers to the land where I will show you, and there I shall make you a great nation, etc., etc. And this command, according to what we know from from the genealogy, from the story of Avraham, happens when Avraham is 75 years old. However, there is a difference of opinion between the commentators about when Avraham actually discovered God. When did Avraham discover that God was one, and essentially invented or discovered the monotheistic belief system? Some say that he did it when he was 3 years old, and others say that he did it when he was 40. And the difference between these two positions seems to be that the 3-year-old can sort of intuitively, in a very instinctive way, sense that there is something, a God. Just like it's very easy to convince 3-year-olds that that there is a God that they have to somehow listen to. A 40-year-old is a person who goes through a long process of search and philosophical analysis until they decide that that indeed that there is a God. But either way, even if you go by the 40 years old, there's still 35 years until Avraham eventually picks up his belongings and goes to Israel, until the point where God actually commands him to go to Israel. And the MyDrash that we look at today will relate to what happens during that time. But one point which I want to already remind us all is that there's a portion in Masechet Avot that says that Avraham had 10 nisyonot, 10 trials that God put him through. And the first one was not Lech Lecha. The first one was actually something called Ur Kasdim, where essentially Avraham declared that he believed in the monotheistic faith against Nimrod, and Nimrod demanded that he follow the false idols that Nimrod believed in, and threw Avraham into a pit of fire. God there protected Avraham, so he was not scathed by the fire. And after that, Avraham was free to go, and that's when God commanded him to go to Israel. If you listen to the sections in the audio archive in MyDrash, you'll find some discussion of that story and its relationship to other stories in the Bible. But for now, let's just keep that in mind when we look at our MyDrash this week. So the first MyDrash on Lech Lecha is very strange. It starts off in a way that doesn't seem to be related almost at all to the Parsha. Yilamdenu Rabbeinu. It's a question for a rabbi. Adam Yisrael, Ma'u she'ekabel alav ol malchut shamayim keshehu mehalech. The person from Israel, is he allowed to accept God's authority while he's walking? Okay, this is not referring to just generally how does a person accept God's authority, God's sovereignship over him. So it's referring to to saying Shema. Okay, a person has to say Shema twice a day, and let's say a guy happens to be on the road. So can he say Shema, while he's on the road, or does he have to stop, and relax, and only once he's done that can he say, Shema. Ravidi v'Ravuna b'Shem Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Yossi b'Shem Rabbi Shmuel. So a bunch of rabbis, Ravidi, Ravuna in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, Amru, Asur lekabel alav ol malchut shamayim keshehu melech. No, you are not allowed to accept God's sovereignship over you as you're walking. Ela ya'amod b'makom echad. You must stand in one place. V'yechaven libo l'shamayim, and direct his heart to the heavens. Be'ima u've'ira beret d'uvziyah u'be'ichud Hashem. You should with a great fear and sort of like fear of God's greatness and awareness of God's greatness. Thinking of God's singularity, and say, Ve'ikra Shema Yisrael Hashem Eloheinu Hashem Echad. Kol echad ve'echad v'kavanat halev. You must have intent of the heart. thinking about this command. ואחר כך, ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד. That's what we say right after Shema, right? ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד. וכשמתחיל ואהבת, and once you move on to the next verse, ואהבת, רצה מהלך, רצה עומד, רצה יושב. Then you can start walking. You want to walk, you can walk. You want to stand, you can stand. You want to sit down, you can sit down. שכך כתיב בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך, ובקומך. Okay, so that afterwards you can start moving around. So here we have the first part of the Tanchuma, is simply stating a halacha. This halacha, I believe, also appears, I would guess, in the Gemara and Brachot, in some context, but it's brought over here, and it seems to be specifically directed to the first verse, because the first verse, as we said, talks about Avraham being told to walk, Lech Lecha, right? And the question that they're asking is, can a person accept God's sovereignty keshehu mehalech, when he walks? Okay, so clearly they're trying to draw, a parallel between these two events, and the question is, what is that parallel supposed to mean? You might think, that when you first read the verse, you'd say, Abraham is being told to go, to leave his family, to leave his friends, leave all that he's known. That's the greatest testimony of Yirat Hashem, of accepting God's sovereignty. God tells him to leave it all, and he goes and leaves it all. But this MyDrash actually seems to say no, that the walking has to happen after you've accepted God's sovereignty. Okay, not that that's the expression of it, but that is what happens after. That actually may be part of ve'ahavta, part of loving God, doing His bidding out of love. So what does this MyDrash mean? Indeed, you can find several interpretations of it that appear on the commentators on the Tanchuma, but I'm going to focus on one by the Be'or Marim, which I found to be a very, very nice perush on this thing. The Be'or Marim is by Rabbi Avraham Meir Razin. I'll try and find out more about him until next time. He says the following thing. The question, he says, that the MyDrash was trying to understand was, what is it that took God so long to send Abraham to Israel? Meaning, why is it that from when Abraham discovers God, whether when he's 3 or when he's 40, he actually thinks that it was when it was 3. That's the position he holds by. But either way, there's still plenty of time, more than several decades that take place that pass before, between when Avraham finally discovers God and when Avraham is told to go. And the question is, why so long? What is it that we're waiting for? Exactly, God. Other than some sort of cosmic, the stars getting aligned and everything, being in place. Well, why does God wait? Why doesn't God just say, Avraham, you discovered me, go for it? And so the answer seems to be, that the answer is that he had to first accept God's sovereignty before he moved on. Okay, so he says over here, I'll read the Be'or Marim. He says, Ki b'kavalat on malchut shamayim, when a person accepts God's sovereignty, צריך האדם להסיר כל המניעות וההטרדות המבלבלות את המחשבה ולקשר את מחשבתו במציאותו ואחדותו יתברך שמו. So first of all, a person needs peace of mind. A person needs peace of mind to be able to completely devote themselves to the idea of monotheism, to the idea of God. עד שיגמור בליבו להמליכו על כל איבר ואיבר ולמסור נפשו עליו בפועל ממש. To the point that you are so committed to God that you're willing to sacrifice your own life. והנה אברהם אבינו, עליו השלום, שעסק בחקירה על האמונה האמיתית, עד שהגיע לידי מידה זו למסור נפשו וקדושת שמו יתברך. So Abraham, who busied himself with this investigation, what's the correct belief, until he reached this degree of belief that he was willing to sacrifice his own life, as we see in the story of Ur Kasdim, that he threw himself into a pit of fire, just because he believed in God. He היה בבחינת He was just like that person who accepts God's sovereignty in the first verse. That the walking, the walking, if he would have gone earlier, would distract him. If Hashem told Abraham to go to Israel earlier, that would have confused him. It would have not given him enough peace of mind to focus on the philosophical issues that he was grappling with. And therefore he couldn't do it. Now you might ask yourself, says the Biro Marim, well, what do you mean? We're able to, so you should take a few minutes. You should, commit himself to God. We seem to be able to do that very, very easily. So why would Abraham need any longer? After all, he was a great man. So he says, no. The fact that we're able to commit to God in such a quick way, just a few seconds of thinking about Shema. We're going already in a paved path. Avraham already, he went the road less traveled, and we're following in his path, so it's easier for us. He basically made it so like our second nature to believe in God. He needed a long period, several dozens of years, until he could do that. Until God revealed himself to Abraham and said, I am the owner of the world, follow my way. And therefore he says, it's understood why he waited until he was 75, because then, after he was willing to give himself, his life up in Or Kasdim, he finally accepted God's ownership for real, and then he could go on the road, and from here on, whatever he goes on the road won't distract him too much, because because what we learn from Shema is, once you've passed the first stage of accepting God's sovereignty, the rest, expressing your love for Him, etc., doesn't need as much focus. Okay, so to sum it up, what he says is, basically two main things. Number one, he says, the reason that God waited from when Abraham discovered him till when he sent him away was because Abraham needed time to reach a certain level of belief that peaked for the first time in the event of Or Kasdim, where Abraham sacrificed his life, or was willing to sacrifice his life for his belief, and that wasn't there yet when he was 40, and therefore, and that needed, he says, it had to be done when he was one place and not walking around, because when you're walking around, it's a technical thing. You're so busy just trying to reach from one place to another, trying to find food. You can't focus on the big philosophical issues that Abraham had to grapple with. And so God waited a bit until Abraham reached that point. The second thing he says, which I think is very beautiful, is to say, Abraham paved the way for us, which is why things that seem to us so easy, so trivial, definitely don't take 30 years, were obvious to Abraham. We're not obvious to Abraham, and he had to do it. So, okay, first of all, it's a very, very nice midrash. A very nice interpretation of the midrash, I believe. And I want to just delve to one or two levels deeper in understanding what the midrash is trying to say according to the Biur HaMaim. First of all, essentially what it's saying is that Abraham discovered not one, but two important things. The first thing that Abraham discovered was monotheism. Monotheism in the sense that in the pagan world that he lived in at the time, believing in one God was ridiculous. You looked at the world, you saw there was so many forces in the world: the sun, the moon, the oceans, the weather, the ground, Mother Earth. It was only natural to attribute each one of these forces to a different entity, and so that's what paganism essentially did, right, or still does. It sort of attributes the plurality in the world that we see to a plurality of forces, each of which having its own agenda, and somehow these forces are constantly, shifting. The balance of power is shifting, and you try to somehow, invest in all of them somehow to make sure that you're protected from all sides. Monotheism came along and said that it's all one, meaning yes, there are many forces that we see in the world, but somehow they all get connected to a single entity which we call God, who controls all these forces we see in the world, and there's no plurality. This plurality is only what you see at the surface, but really underneath it all, it's all one. And it's hard to underestimate the impact of this thing. As Melanie Phillips, who's an author for the Daily Mail in Britain, and an author of several books, has argued, and I believe argued persuasively, monotheism, rather than being a sort of that monotheistic religion, rather than being somehow a contra to scientific development, scientific thought, investigative thought, actually is the underpinning philosophical justification for all scientific thought. Not only do we know, of course, that most of the scientists until very recently were all religious people, but we know from their writings that a lot of their scientific inquiries stem from them being monotheistic believers, because the only reason to believe that the laws that govern nature are all one, and that the laws that govern nature yesterday and those that govern it today, those that govern the oceans, those that govern the stars, are all the same, is only because you believe somehow that there is unity in the forces that drive the world. So monotheism really is what gave birth to science, in the sense, and that it allowed people to tackle reality as a whole, and not as a set of competing forces, each of which is different and unique and unrelated to the other. Abraham, added that, but understanding that moving from a pagan religion to a monotheistic belief, that was not easy. The second thing Abraham did, according to the Biur Amarim, was that wasn't enough, right? That he already got when he was 3, maybe when he was 40. But there still need to be several, a few good years before he reached the point where he was considered God-fearing. In other words, you can be God-believing, but that doesn't mean you're God-fearing. God-fearing means, as the Biur Amarim says, that you're willing to sacrifice your life for God. In other words, the second step, which Abraham had to make, and which is really not a trivial step, and we know that many people actually stay only in the first, is the realization that he finally, it suddenly clicked for him at some point, that if God is really the one who created the world, and all this world comes from God, then, and we come from God, okay, and we, the human beings, were all part of God's plan, then that means that there is a plan. There is a purpose. There is a reason why we're here. And we must commit ourselves to that reason. Okay? It wasn't only enough for Abraham to say, there is a God, it's all monotheistic. That God is not impersonal. That God is not just mechanically turning the cranks and letting the world go, and then people can do whatever they want. But realizing that God also commands. That was Abraham's second, and perhaps even more significant leap, because that's not because that's not a trivial step that comes right after you believe in monotheism, or when you believe that everything stems from God, because that step says, I need to commit myself to God because He created me. Okay, and people could say, well, He created me, so what? I'm going to do whatever I want now. But the fact that He created you, the fact that this infinite being actually care that you should be created, Abraham said, means that I have a purpose in this life. That this life is not just a series of random choices that I make, but it's actually important. What I do here means something, and so I should also be willing to fight for it and to sacrifice my life for it. And so, according to the Biur Amarim, that had to happen first before Abraham went to Israel. But here I want to add something that deviates a bit, or more than a bit, from what the Biur Amarim says, but I think is actually the core truth about what the MyDrash is trying to say, according to his interpretation. And with that, we'll finish up. Which is, again, I understand what he says, what we're saying here, that, why it had, that it was difficult to have this process occur when you're moving. Right? Because he says, well, when you're on the move, you're not able to focus, and all these technical issues that he mentions. But the MyDrash is not trying to just tell something technical. Yes, it's true when you're moving, you're distracted. But in the concept of Avraham, okay, so he'd be a bit distracted. Maybe he'd reach Canaan, and there he would sit down, and there he would reach that level of understanding. What is in the context of Avraham's life, what was the significance that he was not told to move before he had reached this point? I think that the answer is really in that story of Ur Kasdim, where Avraham is sitting in his own, in his own home, or where he's spent, the last several dozen years, and he doesn't just say, "I believe what I believe," and nobody else cares. Rather, because he's in his environment, he's sitting down. Okay, he's settled down in a certain place. This is where he lives. This is where everybody he knows exists, right? And there he makes a declaration saying, "I believe in God. I'm going to go in a different way than all of you." You can never do that. That kind of statement would never occur if you're on the move. A person on the move, he's a drifter. He's in one place one day, another place another day. Nobody cares what he believes in. Nobody's going to try and force him to believe anything else. There's no test to his belief. There's nothing to prove that he's willing to sacrifice so much, right? With Avraham, that stage of reaching, an awareness of commitment to God, of saying, if there is a God, then I need to, to sacrifice my life for my belief. There is a purpose here somewhere. That statement could only have true meaning when there was some sort of a counter offer on the table. Somebody to tell him, no, you can't do that. We don't let you do that. Let's see if you're really ready to put your money where your mouth is. If Avraham was already moving towards Israel at this time, nobody would care. He reaches Israel. He's some guy that comes from out of the land. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody cares about who he is. He can do whatever he wants. There's no sacrifice involved. With God said in this case, though, with Avraham, no. Before he moves anywhere, before he goes anywhere, he has to prove, I want to see his devotion. The nicest part about this whole thing, by the way, and with this I'll end, is that according to the Be'or Marim, that was not only the time where Avraham proved his total devotion to God, it was also the first time that God actually talked to Avraham. Meaning, until this point, where Avraham reaches, the point where he's standing at the edge of the fiery pit and says, "I'm willing to jump into this fiery pit," he has not heard a single word from God. So it's only in his belief. He's by this point, he's not only convinced that there is a God, he's convinced that there's a purpose to this world. So much so is he convinced in it, so much so is it ingrained in his character, that even without having gotten any single clear indication from God, like a direct talk, a direct contact from God, he's willing to sacrifice his life for this realization that there is a purpose to this world, that we are not here for no reason. And he says, I'm not going to give up that belief just because some people are going to kill me for it. This is what I believe. This is so true. I can't ignore it, he says. It's not, I can't live in any other way. I have to live this way. And if I just work a little bit harder, maybe I'll find out what God wants from me. And once Avraham does this, suddenly God reveals himself to him and says, hello, I'm here. You're right, I'm here. And now I have a mission for you. You want to know what your mission is? Let me tell you what it is. Go. I'm going to send you on a mission that will take eons long to complete. We are still part of that mission today. But Avraham only reached it because he said, I'm willing to even jump into a pit of flames, if only to make sure that my life has some meaning. Shabbat Shalom.